Hello and welcome. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
All right, we've got a good buddy of ours joining us back on the show today, and it's funny how cyclical the nature of the programming is on this program. For the longest time, anything ghosts and demons, people would go bonkers about. Then we started to have kind of the rise of the aliens, and people wanted more and more alien stories and abductions and UFO encounters. And then that even started to wane. And then all of a sudden there's just this kind of glut, like we can't get enough monster stories and Bigfoot, Sasquatch, sand squatch, whatever you want to call the creatures. There's, they want more and more of these cryptids and chupacabras and anything. So it's kind of interesting to watch how this cycle runs through. And lucky for us, there's a brand new book coming out in March, and it is up and available for pre-order. Chasing American Monsters, over 250 creatures, cryptids, and hairy beasts. That's the name of the book. The guest, of course, Jason Offutt. And Jason, one of the first guys to bring to our show the legendary Black Eyed Kids, and it has not been the same for us since. Jason, welcome back to the show.
Dave and Tim. I don't want to leave Tim out. Thank you so much for having me back on.
I appreciate it. Yeah, you upset the balance of nature doing our show with Black Eyed Kids. We've certainly been hooked ever since. Our listeners are always hooked, and anything to do with weird oddities, creatures. Now, I just out of curiosity, Jason, at this point, are we kind of looking at Black Eyed Kid encounters as like an offshoot of cryptid, because they don't seem completely human?
Right. In fact, in Chasing American Monsters, I do include a Black-Eyed Kid encounter because even though they appear human, the behavior is not normal human behavior, and they have something else about them, something else that they radiate and cause terror in people, as if they were running into an 8-foot tall giant in the woods. There's something about them that's just not right. So I consider these things monsters.
I've been fascinated watching as these stories grow, and of course, when you brought us the Black Eyed Kids, we hadn't heard of it yet. And we started talking about it, and then more and more stories started pouring in. And, of course, David Weatherly's work on the Black Eyed Kids and many others jumping into the fray. And now you can't go online without finding 1,000 sites that kind of talk about the Black Eyed Kids phenomena. But it seems like there was, just tulpa, thought form, whatever it is. As soon as we started to give life to it and talk about it more, it explodes. And, I have a band of listeners that joke always about the sand squatch, and they want to know, when are we going to start taking the sand squatch more seriously? Of course, something of their own imagination. But I've said, with as much as they keep banging on that, I'm wondering when we're going to start seeing like a Bigfoot of the dunes start making themselves known, because these people seem to want to will this being into existence. Do you see kind of a strange nature when it comes to creatures like this? Areas where there's absolutely no activity, and then once somebody has seen something like this, it seems to permeate the entire region and everybody starts having experiences?
Yes, absolutely. That, because I've thought about this for quite a long time, because it does happen with the Black Eyed Kids. It started out in 1998 with Brian Bethel, a reporter in Texas, who had a Black Eyed Kid encounter and posted it online. And that was it. Nobody else had ever heard of those things before. And, a few years went by, people were sort of talking about it, and then all of a sudden it exploded, and people were running into these entities everywhere. I had written a lot about Black Eyed Kids, and I was going to write a book on them, and my wife was like, everything you write about doesn't bother me, except the Black-Eyed Kids, so please don't write the book. Because if one comes to my house, it's your butt. So I was really glad when David Weatherly came out with his book. So totally off the hook.
Right. But took the pressure off you. And but I'll tell you what, we've kind of put the call out on this show for years now, Jason. Come and make yourself known to us. And by us, I mean Tim. And by Tim, I mean alone in the dark, somewhere where he is unprotected. Not me, of course. I'm important. Tim is my Jim Perkins from or what was his name? Jim on the old Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom.
I'm going to sit safely in the Jeep while Jim goes and wrestles the anaconda.
Exactly. So I like to send Tim out to have these type of encounters because he thinks he's kind of poisoned to the paranormal. So if he's going to be that, I want it to be to the Black-Eyed Kid phenomena. If they try to make their way in, I want them to have to fend their way past him first.
Yeah, there is kind of on this same line of talking about something and making it real. The Slender Man, of course, was completely fictitious.
Right.
But after people started talking about it, it had it went viral online, and we've got the girls from Wisconsin who tried to kill their friend to appease Slender Man. There were people who were actually reporting seeing the entity. So yeah, they might have actually, just by thinking about it, by putting so much energy and focus into it, they might have actually created a Slender Man or caught the attention of some powerful entity who took that form. Same thing could be, again, like we were talking about with the Black-Eyed Kids.
Well, and here's something that when the Slender Man story broke, there had been sightings of a Slender Man-like character here and there. And then they started to assign the name or subscribe the name Slender Man to these sightings. And Tim and I, on an off chance, we just started doing some research and look into many different cultures and lore. And there are there's a lot of different iterations of this tall, lanky, dark, clad character with no face. Some say that he's got the spider-like legs, others, but it's been through time and tide. And it's kind of interesting if that really, if it's taken this guise and it's always been around, but it like cycles through under new names every, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, which it sounds like, now we're talking about the Jeepers Creepers character, right? From the movie, that every 20, 30 years it comes out to feed and then vanishes again. But there is some historical significance to characters like this that do seem to show up. And I started doing more research on the Black-Eyed Kid phenomenon. I found actually more stories of children with milky white eyes, like just completely white eyes that have popped up here and again through culture. And people have looked at those more as maybe messengers. And I've always thought, isn't that interesting? White, you're a messenger. Black eyes, you're evil and something demonic. But the concept is that sometimes these things live and breathe among us without us knowing about it until this kind of global consciousness takes over and everybody starts talking about it and sharing it. And now with the advent of the internet, we're able to get through this information and get it out there a lot faster.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And again, the more people discuss it, the more we're going to see it. I wonder if it's just not. I mean, if these things are just always there, we just don't notice it. My wife and I bought a new car a couple of years ago, and we hadn't ever seen one like this. And we drive back into town, and these things are all over the place. We just didn't notice them before. They were always there. We just didn't see it. It's like I don't remember who had this experiment, but it was a basketball and gorilla experiment. I don't know if you're familiar with that. They had
yes, I've seen that. Dr. Michael Shermer has been a part of a couple of our events and has shown this video clip.
Right. Yeah. You've got the people. People have been told watch this video of these people passing a basketball, and then they didn't know about it, but a guy in a gorilla suit started walking through the frame, and only 40% of the people who were viewing it saw the gorilla because they were so focused on watching the basketball be passed. Just stuff's all over the place. Maybe just something in our minds won't let us see it until people start bringing it up.
It is weird. And why why is it that it's always out there? When you were talking about that mnemonic trigger, I did the same thing. I bought a purple PT Cruiser. I went to get a black one because I thought it looked like a cool old, like, 1930s gangster car. I got roped into buying a purple one because I was a Vikings fan. The guy saw me coming 100 miles away as a rube and realized, you know, he could pawn it off. But I thought, oh, cool. I see black, silver, and white ones. I never see a purple. And the minute I hit the road, every other car was a purple PT Cruiser. And right, it becomes awake in your mind that you begin to notice patterns because the pattern has now injected itself into your life. So do people start becoming aware of these beings and these creatures more often? So, you know, with joking about the sand squatch, I'm just curious, in all of your work, and you've got over, 250 different creatures, have you come across a sand squatch or a Sasquatch of the dunes in any of these instances?
No, have not gotten a sand squatch, although Bigfoot, as you probably know, is everywhere. It's been seen, been reported in 49 of the 50 states. Hawaii is the only one where there's not been any Bigfoot reports. So there are areas of the country where Bigfoot has been seen. Down in the desert Southwest, out in the Great Plains. So it does live out there, but I never heard. Yeah, sand squatch. Let's get one.
So maybe if everybody just keeps focusing on it, we can create and bring to life the sand squatch. So I've not given up on you guys. Don't worry. We will. If there's one to be uncovered, this show will find it for you. So with that said, we're familiar with things like the chupacabra, and it's funny. I get photographs and interesting images sent to me all the time. And there is one you and I need to connect with off air. Recently, a good friend of mine who I know is not prone to hoaxes had something captured in a game cam, and it is pretty interesting looking to me as a potential Bigfoot. This is relatively new to me. I want to share it with somebody like you and Lauren Coleman, maybe Jeff Meldrum, to get kind of a thought on this. At first I was looking and thinking, oh, could this be a bear? Again, I'm not much of an outdoorsy guy. My familiarity pretty much ends with Yogi and Boo Boo is my understanding of what bears in the wild might look like. But, this is something kind of interesting. We're familiar with all these different kind of localized creatures, but I'm getting a lot of these photos of people referring to these things as chupacabra, and it's coming from 3 or 4 different people that are, unaffiliated with one another, and they're catching them on game cams in different areas. But to me, they look like mangy coyotes, and I don't know what's going on here.
Well, there have been a number of cases, at least once a year that I've followed for the last 10 or 15 years. Somebody in Texas or Alabama, Oklahoma, somewhere has claimed, got a hold of the press. Look, I caught a chupacabra, and it always ends up being a mangy coyote or a mangy dog. Every time. Right.
How do you know? I mean, a chupacabra has always been kind of this big, creepy looking creature, not a dog like. When did it turn to becoming like a coyote or a wolf like creature? Hasn't it always been kind of a scaly, sometimes winged looking beastie instead of something more natural?
Right. Yeah. It's maybe 2 to 3 feet tall, more lizard like, bipedal, usually spikes down the back and down the tail. Yeah, and sometimes it's been reported with wings, and it's generally got red eyes. When it turned into the dog-like creatures, when people started finding or shooting these mangy canines and didn't know what they were, because looking at animals with mange, they do not look anything like they do with hair.
No, the bears with mange, those photographs I've seen, that is one. If I saw a bear in the woods, it would, and I have when I was a kid at Y Camp, it froze me in my tracks and was unnerving. But to see a bear with mange, it definitely looks like it's straight out of like a Resident Evil horror movie.
Exactly.
Unbelievable. Right. Yeah, but when did this kind of take off, and suddenly this is the new iteration of what people think chupacabras are?
Well, again, I think it's just that's when people started finding these animals they couldn't ID. I think that's when it happened, and they, when people were saying, "I've got it," I caught a chupacabra, I shot one, I found one dead on my property, just because they didn't know what it was. The news printed that this is a chupacabra, and that's what got stuck in people's heads.
Yeah, very, very weird. So we're familiar with some of those names with the the different iterations of Bigfoot, the chupacabra sightings and things. But what are some of the more unusual creatures that you cover in the new book and some of the tales that go along with them?
Well, I want to throw a couple of Bigfoots out there since we're on Bigfoot.
Sure.
That I think are odd, and one of them is in my home state, Missouri, which is Momo, the Missouri monster that was seen over on the eastern side of the state between Hannibal and St. Louis back in the early 70s. That creature was described as a Bigfoot, but it and the Honey Island swamp monster down in Louisiana, which was described as a Bigfoot, have one thing in common. Other than all the hair and the size and the stench, their feet, they leave 3-toed prints. Okay, Bigfoot, all these plaster casts that you'll see pictures of, or maybe get lucky enough to see one in person. 5 toes, just a giant human footprint. These have 3 pointed toes on each foot, and I just think that's bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly adds a new dynamic. Now, we understand that there are evolutionary skips in every race of being, right? And from time to time, you're going to find some mutations. Are you finding multiple sites with this kind of marking? So it wouldn't just be like a one-off 3-toed Bigfoot. Maybe you got too close to a trap or a battle with another animal that might have nipped off a couple of toes.
On both feet? Yeah.
Well, maybe it's an asymmetrical OCD animal. But yes, you're looking for logic on this topic from me, Jason. I don't know logic from this.
All right. Of course, we're talking about monsters undiscovered by science. So of course, anything's possible. But the 3 toes is not fairly common. It's not common, but like I said, in Louisiana, a Bigfoot down there was left 3-toed footprints, and I can't remember where, but there were a couple of more in the U.S. that were like that. I find this absolutely fascinating that Bigfoot reports from, again, all 50 or 49 of the 50 states are similar, except that there are some that are just wildly different, like the 3-toed foot. There are also Bigfoot that look a little bit smaller, more like husky chimps. There are also, the Florida.
That's how they described Tim and I in grade school. A bunch of husky chimps. Wasn't that what it was, Tim?
That is an awesome band name, by the way, the Husky Chimps.
Yes. Well, the Florida, the skunk ape down in Florida looks more like the pictures of the Michalak ape look more like an orangutan than what the one a Bigfoot does. Why all, if it's Bigfoot, why all the variation? I think that's cool.
All right. With all of these different creatures, though, I mean, are we seeing, obviously Momo's got 3 toes. Are we seeing different attributes to these different characters in different areas? Are we seeing higher foreheads, deeper inset eyes, bigger hands, hair that covers? And the one I saw in Foley, Alabama, when I was young, had hair that came over its hand like Chewbacca. All right. And it pushed down the top of the bush. I remember specifically seeing it was like a hairier palm, not hairier palm, that is a whole different thing, but a hairier hand that came over the top of the bush and pushed it down. And only when I saw Chewbacca did it remind me of that. And I was like, oh, that's how it looked. It didn't have like fur that went up to its wrists and then bare hands. That wasn't the look of this. This had long hair going over. And I haven't heard a whole lot of reports of a being like that before.
Well, I mean, there's some that are hairier in different spots. There's one in Canada called Yellow Top that's got blonde hair on top of his head. But I mean, look at all the variations of human beings. There are people hairier than others, and so I mean, it could just be that type, the hair wise, that type of variation. One of the things that I'm trying to wrap my head around when it comes to Sasquatch is there are a lot of reports of Sasquatch being, looking like a gorilla, having that kind of face, and then there are a lot of reports of Bigfoot having a human face. Which is it? Are there two different ones? Is there a more human-like Sasquatch? The Native Americans have, considered the Sasquatch to be just another, from another tribe. Just another tribe of humans. They, warred with them. They, the Sasquatch sometimes, stole their children and ate them, but they also traded with it. There have also been a lot of, you mentioned Dr. Meldrum, the Sasquatch research program that he's involved with. Dr. Melba Ketchum is leading that. The Bigfoot DNA that she's found and had analyzed was human, just a little odd. It was the same with in Canada. A researcher found
was Meldrum with that? I thought Meldrum was not a part of that program. I know David Weatherly, I think, is a part of that panel. I'm actually going to be talking with Melba on Midnight in the Desert sometime in the next week or two here to discuss her findings and work. But I'll have to talk to her about that. But right, the part of the genome seems to be human, but off.
Right, and it was the same with this researcher in Canada in Alberta, and it was human DNA, but not quite. Something was a little off. There's a British scientist who was studying the saliva of descendants of Zana, or maybe it's Xana, the Alma that was captured in the 1940s in Russia, and the Russian Bigfoot, and townspeople had sex with it and produced offspring. And the DNA that he's had analyzed has been human, just strange. So one of the things that I've been wondering is, what if they are Bigfoot? What if this is Bigfoot DNA, but it shows up to be human because they are?
Right. Yeah, I guess that's a good aspect of it. And yeah, you're right. A lot of the Native American tribes talk about them being just another tribe.
Exactly.
They don't differentiate between. They call them cannibals. I know, or they don't call them cannibals, but they're leery of them because they are cannibalistic and will eat others and other tribes. So that's been a negative. But wow, a lot of weird stuff when it comes to these beings. And I'm curious, Jason, you've been doing a lot of work and research on these for a long time. In your honest opinion, do you believe that a Bigfoot-like creature truly exists here in America?
I'm going to do kind of a roundabout way of going to a yes or no. Again, they've been seen everywhere in North America. They've been seen in South America. They've been seen in Australia, Europe, Russia, China. They've been seen everywhere. And I sort of equate this with ghosts as well. That it's the same thing, that ghosts have been seen in every culture. It's part of their belief system. So with Sasquatch and with other types of paranormal entities, they've got to be. I really honestly think they've got to exist, because so many people over so many centuries have encountered these entities. We just haven't found it yet, which really blows my mind, because we pull all sorts of things out of the ocean, and 14,000 to 18,000 new species are discovered every single year, and most of them are insects, really tiny things. Why can't we find a 9 foot tall, 800-pound, hairy primate?
Yeah, that's the one that seems to really kind of trip up a lot of people when we talk about these beings. All right, did you have a couple more of the Bigfoot-like encounters you wanted to talk about besides Momo?
Well, the one that got me really started back when I was a kid is the folk monster from Arkansas. It was made into the story of it was made into the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, which had a really big impact on me when I was a kid. It was a family living out by Boggy Creek in the middle of nowhere by this the closest town was pretty small. I think it still is, and they were basically terrorized by this entity, or more than one entity. They never could shoot it and bring it down. The thing would leave deep scratches in the walls of their house. It would stare through the windows at them, and it seemed really, really threatening. And eventually they moved. But the one thing that really fascinated me as a kid when I saw this movie was that this thing was a threat. If you watch, people who've watched Harry and the Hendersons, it's just a big friendly vegetarian guy, and there are so many stories like the folk monsters where it's not friendly at all. There are lots of reports out there of Bigfoot twisting people's heads off. So. Yeah, I love being out in the woods.
Yeah, those are not the ones I want to run into. Again, that's where I'll sit in the Jeep eating my banana and peanut butter sandwich and send Tim out to go investigate. Let him deal with the head twisting Sasquatches. We caught a good rash there for about 2 years of people coming on talking about very aggressive Bigfoot sightings. Are there different... Again, do you think these are different breeds? Are they just like any animal? If you corner them or make them feel threatened, or perhaps come between them and their children, this is what leads to the attacks? That really could be a lot of it, because with any animal, even human animals, if you threaten their children, they will become aggressive. If you corner an animal, they will become aggressive. If you go on somebody else's turf, somebody else's territory, they will act aggressive toward you. I was just listening to a podcast, and a woman was talking about her and her family had moved. Well, not her family; it was her and her daughter had moved to a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, and there was a family of Bigfoot that lived on the property, and she saw them every single day, and left fruit out for them, and they'd play jokes on her. And I was thinking to myself, that is not true. That is terrifying. If that was true, that is terrifying. You know what? We talked about this a few weeks back. Tim, do you remember who the guest was? It's eluding my thoughts right now, but we were talking about fairy folk and how you really kind of get in trouble once you feed them and then stop.
I don't remember the name of the guest. No.
It's driving me crazy. Anyway, and I started to wonder if Bigfoot might be part of the elementals or fairy folk, that once you start leaving tributes to them, when you stop, it pisses them off. And that's when all hell breaks loose. Because in a lot of these cases, it does seem when they stop giving them food, bad things occur.
If somebody was giving me tacos and then they stopped giving me tacos, I would not be in a good mood.
Yeah. So when you show up on Taco Tuesday and it's not Taco Tuesday, get the hell out of your way.
Oh, exactly. Somebody's got hell to pay right there. Yeah. Joshua Cutchin has, I think his latest book, or maybe his latest two books, have been on fairy folk. And one of the things that really, there are a lot of correlations between fairy lore and reported Bigfoot behavior. That sort of thing. If older Scandinavians still leave a saucer of milk or a saucer of beer and some bread out for the tomtars, I believe they're called, which is their word for gnome, because if they don't, they'll the gnome will go crazy and break things and tie cattle's tails together and things like that. But with Bigfoot, they seem to be able to disappear. I mean, you'd think something that big wouldn't be able to just vanish, but there are lots of reports of it just disappearing into the woods, or reports of it left footprints and all of a sudden, whoa, the footprints just stopped. Maybe they are just another type of fae folk.
Yeah, that is something I'm going to continue to look at, and maybe talking to some of the more fairy and fae folk experts, what their thoughts are on beings like this. And again, I know now we're starting to get into the real stretches. It's one thing, Dave, you want me to believe that there might be a giant bipedal humanoid ape-like creature. Okay, maybe I can buy that. Now you want me to start believing he might be a fairy? But who knows? I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff that we just don't understand that was accepted as normal for a long time, and by many different, intelligent groups around the world. So it might be worth investigating a little further. Let's start getting into some of the weirder creatures you found in the new book.
All right, there were, there were a lot of fun ones. Well, and by fun, I mean there was one in I believe it was New Jersey who looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon, and it was three young women were out swimming in this river, and one of them she thought she'd caught her leg on a branch that was hidden under the water, and was tugging to get it free, and then whatever was holding her leg started tugging back. And she started screaming and thrashing, and the thing let her go. And when it surfaced, it looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon. And the interesting thing is this was about the time that the movie came out. She did have a three-clawed green handprint on her leg that she couldn't wash off for about 3 or 4 days, and it finally went away. But monsters that. This was, of course, creature from the Black Lagoon was bipedal. I like bipedal monsters because they've got to be akin to us at some point. And what happened if these things are real all along the evolutionary trail to produce that and us? It was like the Loveland Frogs or another one in Loveland, Ohio, back in the 1970s. Police officers, two different nights were driving in different spots, and they saw what they thought were people walking alongside the road, kids walking alongside the roads, until they stopped and put the light on them, and they were like 4 foot tall bipedal frogs that panicked and ran down into a nearby river. Yeah, what are these things? Where did they come from? Why are they that size? Why are they walking on 2 legs? Like the same with dogmen. Dogmen fascinate and freak me out at the same time. Yeah,
that is starting to get weird. And again, I want to maybe you have a different differentiation between what a dogman and a werewolf is. What are the true differences on that? But the frogman encounters, we've started to hear periodically through the years of frog-like creatures that have appeared in people's homes and act almost sentinel outside of especially children's rooms. Mostly people that had the experiences saw them when they were children. And I know that there have been a few different frogman-like encounters around. But again, could that be something more extraterrestrial that people may be seeing and coming across? It's, I don't know. I love the different kind of versions of these stories. And, all of a sudden I start seeing images of what was my childhood nightmare, the Slee Stack from Land of the Lost. Yeah, exactly. There was nothing more terrifying as a kid for me than watching the Slee Stack pop up. Speaking of terrifying and strange, it's time now to turn to Theater of the Mind. Today's Theater of the Mind is shared by Aaron Smalley. Something's in the shed. I live in the great state of Washington and have my whole life. I love the pristine wilderness and the lifestyle here. And although I'm not much of an outdoors person, I have a deep appreciation for the serene views and surroundings. About 7 years ago, I had been working in my garage and I heard a ruckus coming from my backyard that is pushed up against a very woodsy area. Dogs in the neighborhood were barking like crazy. You could hear the telegraph bark start down the block, and then every outdoor dog jumped in, excitedly barking, definite warning kind of bark. I made my way around the house and saw that my shed was rocking like something big had gotten in there. There were these loud, guttural sounds coming from inside, and my first thought was that maybe a bear had made his way down and into my shed. I peeked around the corner, fearful it might not be alone, and I wanted to stay out of the eye line of a mama bear if her cubs were in tow. The growling and grunting continued, and a strange kind of moaning, like whatever was inside might have been in pain. I went inside my house and quickly looked up animal control and gave them a call. The phone began to ring, maybe 2 or 3 times. Then there was this crackle and pop on the other end. And then it continued ringing, but a strange ring, like the ones you hear overseas. That kind of sound. Then someone answered. Animal control, how may we assist you? The voice came out in a monotone, dead way. I think I have a bear or something in my shed. It's in there now, and I think it may be hurt, I informed the voice. We'll send someone right out. The voice responded in a cold, almost emotionless way, and then hung up. I found that odd, as I didn't even give them my name or address. How would they know where to send someone? It couldn't have been more than just a few minutes, and I heard a vehicle pull into my driveway. I exited through my garage to meet them and explain the situation. When I strode out of the garage, I saw that there was a large black SUV in my driveway. 2 men exited the vehicles and made their way to me. Both were dressed in dark suits and blackened sunglasses. You reported an animal incident? The first one questioned in the same lifeless voice as I had heard on the phone. I did. It's around the back in my shed. Sounds big and wounded, I concluded. The 2 men shared a synchronized nod and walked around me, heading to the backyard. I spun on my heels and followed along. How did you guys get here so fast? I questioned. One of them responded, We've had a few calls on this. We were already in the area. If you don't mind me saying, you guys don't seem dressed to stop a bear or handle any animal, I said out loud. Both men stopped in their tracks. The man in black on the right turned to face me and said very coolly, We have this covered. Please return to your home and stay inside, he ordered. I did what I was told, figuring maybe they were here to assess and call for backup. They stopped halfway in my yard and listened, watched, and stood silent, taking in the situation. Finally, one lifted what I assumed was a phone to his ear. The other lifted his hands and covered his ears, and the backyard was filled with a shrill siren scream that seemed to warble like a loud, high-pitched With the commotion in my shed seeming to reach a fevered pitch, the doors flew open as this very big, stooped-over, bear-like creature ambled out, its voice crying out in pain over the sound of the... It turned and began moving away from the sound. The men took off on foot following it. This thing really took on a strange gait in the way that it ran, almost reaching a gallop as it scrambled to avoid the men. It dove behind a large set of hedges, and I watched from the safety of my back room out of the sliding glass door, waiting for it to emerge from the other side of the hedge, when finally what appeared to be a large black cat shot around the hedge and sprang towards the road. Then, in what I would say was just a puff of black smoke, it was gone. Like it just turned into a black cloud and then imploded. With that, it was over. I couldn't believe my eyes. The wah-wah immediately died down, and the 2 strangers made their way across the yards and back to my driveway. I popped my head out and called, Everything okay? What the hell was that? The 2 men just stopped, stared at me, and the man about to enter the passenger side said, Just a wild animal, ma'am. And with that, he got back in the SUV and they took off. After all I had just witnessed, I was kind of snapped back to reality and said out loud to myself, Did he just call me ma'am? I am very clearly a dude, 6'2" and pushing 300 bills with a brushy beard. They pulled out and stopped at the end of the driveway. The driver's window slowly rolled down. The driver peered out at me and said, "Please call if it returns." And then they drove away. How did these jokers get here so fast? I mean, the ring changed. Maybe it was forwarded to someone out in the field because they were already tracking the creature. But then again, they came with no tools, nets, guns, or anything that would be needed to subdue a creature of that size. They didn't seem frightened, surprised, or reactive at all. It took me 2 days to get out and look in my shed, and to my utter astonishment, after all that crashing around, there was nothing out of place. Nothing damaged at all. I called the animal control number again to see if I could get an update. This time it rang as usual, and some dopey voice answered.
Animal control, how may I help you?
It wasn't the voice or voices I had heard before. There was no strange ring. The call just went through as normal. I told them I was calling in to follow up on the complaint from 2 days ago. They said they had no record of any complaints and did not dispatch anyone to our area that day. I don't know what happened or what I really saw, but it was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced. I've since spoken to my neighbors. No one saw anything, heard the loud, high-pitched wah-wah noise, or called animal control that day. I know I saw people looking out windows and out garages as this thing was happening, but no one seems to want to discuss it or remember it. One thing I can say, I know what I saw. There was something in my shed.
Beyond the darkness.
Welcome back to the show. We're chasing American monsters. Over 250 creatures, cryptids, and hairy beasts. That's a new book due out this March. Our guest, Jason Offutt. We've been talking about some of the more strange and unusual stories. Now, that theater of the mind was weird to me because, A, it kind of calls into mind the idea of a cryptid-like encounter and Men in Black. And I haven't heard many instances where these guys show up for a cryptid report. Is that something relatively new to you, or am I just out of the loop on these kind of stories? Do from time to time when they see these large creatures, do Men in Black seem to find their way into the narrative?
It's not common, but the first real Men in Black reports that John Keel wrote about with the Mothman prophecies were with, they were associated with sightings of the Mothman. So I mean that's a cryptid encounter, and that's when the Men in Black started popping up. Usually the people I've talked to who've seen what they think is a Man in Black, it's always with a UFO encounter. But I mean, again, the first big one was with the cryptid.
All right, good. So then I guess we're not so far removed from that, because I always look for those when I'm reading the stories. I try not to be judgmental. Some of them are so far out there I don't bother putting together. Some of them are far out there, but they're a fun read, and I could see Tim having some fun with the sound effects, so I pushed a couple of through. I think we had the one with the Bigfoot bear fight. Yep. Which was a fun, weird story, and we've had some creepy ass Bigfoot stories throughout the years on the show, but. When I read this one, I'm like Men in Black and a cryptid it was kind of like a cryptid shapeshifter. So I guess maybe that would fit into the realm of Mothman or alien-like activity. But either way, just very strange. How about that? What about shape-shifting creatures? Do you have many accounts of these where they appear one way 1 second and something the other way? And we were talking about dogmen encounters before the break, and I said, what's the difference between dogmen and werewolves? Is there a pronounced difference that you know of?
Yeah, with dogmen and werewolves, I mean, I'm assuming they would look a lot alike whenever they were in canine form. But werewolves, stories of them have always been a human being turning in to a wolf or a wolf man. And dogmen are just bipedal, very tall bipedal dogs. So, I mean, it could be a werewolf, or it could be that this is what this thing is 24/7.
Yeah, do you think that this is just the kitschier millennial version of a werewolf now? Is the Dogman stories? Is that what's kind of, again, we see that some of these creatures and creature-like encounters have changed over the years. I don't know. Is there any kind of real market difference of the way that they appear? As you said, you think most times one-on-one, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But, I know some have talked about these dogmen turn into large hellhound-like creatures, like huge Rottweiler-looking bigger dogs, that will run after people. They'll go from a standing position into a full-on running four-legged creature. But again, I'm not sure, what the mainstay of these type of accounts have been.
Well, what we think of when we think of the werewolf, as in we Americans, is the Lon Chaney Jr., with the Wolfman from back in 40, whenever that came out. 43, I think. Anyway, which is a human that's got a hairy face. But traditionally, the werewolf, if someone has been bitten by a werewolf or wore a belt made out of wolf skin, drank out of a werewolf print, rainwater out of a footprint of a werewolf, all these things, or of a wolf, all these things will turn somebody into a werewolf. And when they change, they can either change into, what these dogmen look like, which is a really large dog or wolf looking creature that's bipedal. Or they can change into an enormous alpha wolf that can lead whatever wolf packs, because it's bigger and stronger. A dire wolf, sized creature. So yeah, werewolves, traditional European werewolves, can do the same thing.
All right, and in these encounters with these dogmen, do they seem aggressive? Are they chasing people down, or are they more like real wolves? If you come upon them, they probably want to skitter away from you and not be bothered.
It really depends on the encounter, and apparently the dog man's mood at the at the day, or if somebody hadn't given him tacos,
Right.
Because there've been a lot of encounters.
Hey, you got any tacos in that backpack?
Yeah.
Tim likes my Rolf the Dogman impersonations. I don't know.
It's spot on, really. I mean.
Right. So I guess it just depends again, are you, when are you at it, and are they in a feeding frenzy, right? Are they looking for food, or have they already slaked their hunger with something else they caught in the woods? That's the other problem I seem to have with a lot of these kind of creatures is, do the locations for these creature sightings, is there enough in the environment to feed these kind of beings if they did exist?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And with I'm not sure if somebody's done any sort of study on this with Dogman, but I do know a guy it's been a number of years ago, did a study on this area where a few Bigfoot had been seen certain times of year, and then the Bigfoot would disappear for a while, and he looked at migration patterns of all of the wildlife a Bigfoot could feed on. And at the time of the year that the Bigfoot was gone, those animals that he could have easily fed on and sustained himself, they were gone as well. And when they came back, it came back. So, one spot of woods, probably not, because with a dogman, I think maybe the deer would learn to avoid that spot. So maybe it's maybe it wanders for its food as well.
Well, and I would have to assume we would see more prints of these creatures near waterways.
Well, and going back to Bigfoot again, that's a lot of people who've studied Bigfoot say that that's where Bigfoot, where he travels along rivers. And there are quite a bit of Bigfoot reports that have been near a major waterway.
All right, now let's move on to some more of the obscure kind of creatures. We've covered everything from melon heads and on, but again, melon head creatures seem to be more of maybe hydrocephalic humans as opposed to real creatures or beasts that are out wandering. What are some of the more unusual characters that we can get into in the new book?
Well, since you brought melon heads up, I just there are a number of melon head stories throughout the United States, and it's always based on the same legend that they're escapees from a mental institution that when somebody looked into it never existed, or they were a family of albinos that interbred for generations. Those are the same stories across the country, so I'm not putting a lot of stock in melon heads. Some of the strange creatures, one of my favorites because it involves H.P. Lovecraft, which is what you were talking about the frogs earlier reminded me of.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. In Vermont, there was a creature that terrorized this town for a short period of time, and they named it the Awful. It was basically a manicore, which is a lion's body, enormous wings, and the tail of a scorpion. And people in this town would see it flying overhead. The first time anybody saw it is these mill workers were crossing a bridge to go into town for lunch, and it was sitting on the top of this building glaring at them. A woman who was hanging her clothes on the line, she all of a sudden heard her dog start growling, and she turned around, and this thing was sitting on the roof of the barn staring at her. And she ran into the house and hid under her and her husband's bed until her husband came home. There were newspaper accounts of the Awful, reached as far as Lovecraft in Rhode Island, and he went and stayed in this town in Vermont for a couple of weeks just to collect stories and see if he could see it as well. And he used something similar in some of his work.
I would love, with the kind of stories, and please, folks, again, you can call our Voices from Beyond message center and leave messages if you've had any strange cryptid encounters, things that we don't always cover on the show. Our phone number is 651-300-4977. We'd love to feature them on a Saturday Parashare. But please send us your stories. If you're more comfortable writing the story, you can email me, Dave@darknessradio.com. Don't be afraid to use punctuation and paragraphs. I'm going to challenge you to do that. As a matter of fact, I know you've got it in you. You're capable of it, my friends. Just use a little comma and period here and there, an exclamation point to make an exciting point, and use some paragraphs, and I will read them on upcoming episodes. Or just give us a call at that voicemail, 651-300-4977, and we will feature them going forward. So many different creatures seem to have incited and inspired, many different kind of shock horror concepts that have been out there. Even the Bloody Bones Man, what we're reading and talking about this creature, which really doesn't fit into the cryptid realm. It almost seems like what Freddy Krueger was based on, this man devoid of skin, almost like he's had his skin removed, and wide eyes, yellow teeth, and smile. Very chilling, but it seems like some of these versions of creatures have gone on to inspire a lot of really scary stuff. I'm glad to see the Krampus stories are picking up around the holidays, and there's many different stories coming out on that. But, again, a lot of those are more the fantasy tales. Have you got any favorite cryptid movies out there that you've caught, Jason, that you thought would, hey, this is really kind of a neat version of this creature?
Well, I'm going to take one step back to Krampus. Don't think I haven't told my children the Krampus story every Christmas since they were really small.
Yeah, I've told mine too. They don't believe me, especially on December 6th. They're like, okay. All right, Dad, see, I'm still here. So what I did last night while you were sleeping, Krampus didn't come get me. Sons of guns. Horrible children.
Yeah, movies, Leprechaun. No, I'm kidding.
Yes. No, I like the original Leprechaun movies. I will have to admit that. I mean, it kind of jumped the track, and I know Tim will fight me on this, but Leprechaun in the Hood, started to lose me. But that, I think, that might have been into Tim's vein of interest at that point.
I didn't like any of the Leprechaun movies, to be honest with you. But
what? Even with what's her name?
Jennifer Aniston.
Jennifer Aniston running around screaming and being chased by one?
No.
How dare you, sir? I guess they're now rebooting that series, and the new movie is going to take place immediately after the first one with Jennifer Aniston. So there you go, Tim. You get a chance to hate the series all over again.
Oh, goody.
Yeah.
Hey.
You know what's funny to me, Jason, right, is the stories of leprechauns. People have heard about it, associated with Ireland for years. And when you go to Ireland, they have a leprechaun museum, and it's all American versions of leprechauns. And they're like, yeah, we don't really have leprechauns here. This is more of a Walt Disney thing. Darby O'Gill and the Little People. You got your Lucky Charms guy, and literally that's what they have, are boxes of Lucky Charms, Darby O'Gill and the Little People posters, and things that were our imaginations, nothing really Irish based. They just looked at them as the wee folk.
Right. They didn't really celebrate St. Patrick's Day until we did. It was our American influence.
So they saw how well Chicago took off with it?
Probably.
All right. What else have you got for us?
Well, I didn't answer your question. You asked
movies.
About movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is one that I caught and I'd never heard of before. It was made in the 50s or really early 60s. Might have been the late 50s. Called The Abominable Snowman, and it was a movie with Peter Cushing. It was a Hammer film. And it was starring Peter Cushing, and he was going and looking in the Himalayas for the abominable snowman, and his guide was Forrest Whitaker, from F Troop, not Forrest Whitaker, Forrest Tucker, Forrest Tucker.
Forrest Tucker, that's Forrest who it was, Tucker
from F Troop, and they went in search, and what they ended up finding was these Bigfoot-looking creatures, but they were intelligent and used telepathy. And that really surprised me, because that is one of the things that some Bigfoot enthusiasts think Bigfoot can do, is use telepathy. They've claimed that people receive telepathic messages from Bigfoot, and here we got a movie from the 1950s showing that. I think it was a well done movie. And I'm also a sucker for Hammer films.
Yeah, boy, I'll have to check that one out. I love a good movie, and especially if it's got a different take on the character all over.
I just ruined it for you, man. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. It's still, I have no memory. I will forget. I asked you a question 5 minutes ago about movies and already forgot that I asked you the question. So don't be afraid. I've already forgotten what the name of the movie is. So Tim will have to remind me to watch Forrest Whitaker's Abominable Snowman Kills the F Troop group movie, and we'll watch that together.
I want that F Troop remake with Forrest Whitaker. I can't wait for that. If you could get Antoine Fuqua to do the remake, I would be all for it. It'd be like Training Day.
The Training Day of F Troop. Yes, that would be something alarming and fun to watch.
That'd be awesome.
All right, Chasing American Monsters, over 250 creatures. Were there any new additions, things that you hadn't heard of before that you uncovered for this book?
Oh yeah, there were a lot. There were a lot, and two I'll mention they're kind of silly, but they're fun at the same time. One is a monster from the 1800s in Pennsylvania called the squonk, and it's like a what are the dogs with all the folds of skin?
Oh, the Shar-Peis?
The Shar-Pei. It's a pig Shar-Pei with lots of warts. Okay. And it's depressed all the time and cries. And if you run across...
You dated her in high school, didn't you, Tim?
Well, let's just say it was a rough couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And you can see the thing and hear it crying in the woods, but generally people it's very elusive and they haven't been able to catch it. One farmer claims to have caught it, and he had a big burlap sack with him and stuffed it in the sack and carried it back home. And when he got home, the squonk was not in the bag anymore. The bag was completely soaked and dripping, so he thought it turned to tears.
Really?
Yes.
That's called the squonk?
The squonk.
Now, was this a one-off kind of sighting again, falling into the urban legend category?
Oh, yes. The 1800s were really rife with that sort of thing. And newspapers were so sensational in the 1800s. And the newspapers covered this story, and it was more urban. It was urban legend. It was still fun.
Right. Yeah. When you can uncover these. And it is neat now that there is at the tip of your fingertips the ability to start checking out old newspaper reports going back into the 1800s from newspapers. There's got to be a lot of strange things that pop up.
Oh yeah, there are. One story that I absolutely loved had to do with humpback whales. I'm not talking about Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home, although I might watch that later. A wealthy man, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. Again, this was back in the 1800s.
Let's call him Tim Dennis.
Tim Dennis.
Right.
Spent $500.
Yes.
And hired this whaling crew to capture, not kill, but capture a male and female humpback whale. And they were brought to San Francisco, loaded aboard these special train cars full of seawater, and taken to Utah and let loose in the Great Salt Lake. And his idea was to fill the Great Salt Lake with whales that people could hunt, and you could have, they could really survive on this. We'd have whale oil and, everything here. And the things from the newspaper account, the things immediately broke out of the pen that was built in the lake and disappeared. The problem being is if this actually happened, the salt content of the Great Salt Lake is so much higher than the ocean, he would have killed the whales almost immediately.
What if he took half the water out? Then it would only be half as salty.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I like to think these things ahead, Jason. I'm always concerned for that because you'd have to empty half the water to enter whales into the ecosphere anyway, wouldn't you?
At least.
So I love that was the concept people believed, and then they just vanished because whales are known for their tiptoeing abilities too. So they're very stealthy, ninja humpback whales. What a weird. As people, we are fascinated by the most bizarre and unusual stories. Well, I mean, was that pretty well believed at the time? Does it appear?
Oh yes, absolutely, and it was an Associated Press story, and it was all over the country. People reading about this, and there was a follow up done in the 80s or 90s by the University of Utah, trying to find if this actually happened, and they couldn't find if this had actually happened or not. But all they had was the newspaper reports.
Jason Offutt, our guest today, chasing American monsters, over 250 creatures, cryptids, and hairy beasts. That's the topic at hand. Are you finding, too, and I know you're doing American monsters in this book, but do you find some of these weirder and one-off stories? Are there any corresponding versions of these characters that appear in other cultures that you're aware of?
Well, I mean, I don't know how other culturish this is, but I'm also working on chasing Canada's monsters, and there are a lot of similarities. I mean, because a number of these have been Native American, stories dating back to before European settlers came here. So the Canadian ones are fairly similar. Once you get outside the country, there are a lot of different variations, but there are a lot of similarities. We talked about werewolves earlier. I mean, that's
right.
That's all over the place. Let me just put it this way: whether or not these creatures, if they exist, do they exist other places? Again, we talked that Bigfoot probably does, but we are the great melting pot. We had people come here. We still have people coming here from all over the planet. And when people move to a different country, they just don't bring, an extra pair of, extra pair of underwear. They bring, their families. They bring their food. They bring their language. They also bring their legends. And there are a lot of legends that come over. In Louisiana, you've got the loup-garou, which is the French werewolf.
It's also Australian for beer.
For beer. In Pennsylvania, and this eventually went to California during the gold rush. But some of the greatest miners in the world were from Cornwall, England, and they were brought over to dig in mines in Pennsylvania and California, and they brought with them the Tommyknockers, which were little dwarf-like figures in overalls who would dig in the mines and would either warn you of impending doom, or if you ticked them off, they would possibly cause your doom, and they sometimes stole your lunch. In South Dakota, there's the Banshee of the Badlands. Well, Irish settlers brought that over because that's an Irish legend. So a lot of these monsters, yes, they've existed someplace else. And the Snallygaster from New England was brought over. The legends were brought over from Germany. So to answer your question,
and it is weird, right? The Snallygaster's known enemy is the Rougarou. They're located in two different areas, which is weird. Well, now you know why.
Well, right.
Right. They're enemies. They're staying away from each other. So you've got all these different characters and creatures that come with the different cultures that moved over to the United States and become part of our lexicon. But again, a lot of these fall into the urban legend, and a lot of these creatures seem to have kind of a cautionary tale associated with them. What are some? And the names are aside from Mothman, Chupacabra, and Sasquatch, Bigfoot, skunk ape, whatever version of Bigfoot you want to refer to it as. What are some of the other well-known cryptids here in the United States that I'm forgetting? You've got a lot of sea creatures or lake monsters, but are there any other well-known creatures that seem to hunt and live in the United States?
Well, yeah, the lake monster is one, and those kind of frustrate me. I love lake monster stories. I bought books on the Loch Ness Monster when I was from the Scholastic Book Club when I was in elementary school, because I just loved that. But we've got a whole lot of landlocked lakes that are, people claim to see what looks like a plesiosaur. Well, I seriously doubt that a plesiosaur lives in Lake Tahoe, but we have Tahoe Tessie. There's one in Minnesota in Lake Pepin.
Peppy.
Peppy, yeah. And and there are also legends like that of monsters in man-made lakes. Are you kidding me? So, I mean, the lake monsters are really, really common. Giant catfish are really common as well. There's I'd always heard growing up that in this lake down in South Missouri that scuba divers had found, they'd seen catfish, as big as a car. There are catfish almost that big in Spain and in Southeast Asia, but we don't have those species over here. However, I was interviewing somebody down at the Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and I was asking him about the biggest catfish ever caught in the lakes, and he told me that they had it for a while in the in the tourist center, and it was a 180-pound catfish, which is an enormous catfish. But he said on its back was a bite mark that was enormous. Something had tried to eat it. So there might be something down there. I don't know. But I think that's
another reason I don't like lakes or outside, because if there's something big enough to bite something that big and leave a mark on its back, no, thank you. I'm out. I didn't even realize there were freshwater shark. That's really unsettling to me.
Well, there's even sharks will swim up the Mississippi River for a while to nest, to lay eggs.
All right. What other strange tales do you have to share with us? And is it possible, before we say goodbye today, to sneak one more Black-Eyed Kid story out of you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So let's cover at least one or two more quick little weird creatures before we say goodbye, and then hit us with your a new Black-Eyed Kid story. I know our listeners love that, and they're always looking for somebody to share a new tale.
Okay. one of the one of the funniest stories is in Colorado, and this was during during the gold rush, and people were heading out west to find their fortune, and people were mining in Colorado before they moved on to California. But to scare people off their claims, miners developed a monster to scare people called the rock slide bolter. And what this is a monster that's the size and shape. It's a whale. It's a land whale. And instead of the fluke on the end of its tail, it had a hook. And the hook was to hold it on top of a mountain. And as soon as any human, wandered in its way, it would release the hook and slide down the mountain and swallow the people up. And they would, be eaten and never be seen again. And that's a funny story. And I've always wondered how the hell it got back up the mountain.
Stop looking for answers. You can't handle the truth, Offutt. Oh, yeah, that's very bizarre. All right, and what's our last strange creature? And remember, kids, there's 250 different beasties to cover in this book, and Jason's just given us a taste. You got to get a copy of the book. You can go pre-order it. We'll have a link to that book on today's podcast, so you can find it and pre-order the book now. It'll be coming out officially in March, but don't wait. Pre-order it. Plus, that helps the author. If they get a bunch of pre-orders on it, it always does great work for them as well, and they get asked to do more books, so we do our best. And here's one other favor, if I can ask all of you. If you're listening to us via iTunes, please go on and rate the show 5 stars. What's it cost you? Just give us 5 stars and give a great review. Let's continue to spread Beyond the Darkness so more and more people find it. The more of you that respond and give good reviews, the wider the show spreads. And when you hear these authors on our show and you buy their books, and I know many of you do, please go ahead and give them acknowledgement and encouragement on Amazon or wherever you've purchased the book, because the more that they get, the higher it gets in the ratings, the more people become aware of the work that they've done. And it's great reciprocal. And if you enjoy the entertainment you get from the books, be kind and give back. And it costs you nothing to give a good rating and review. So do that, and I'd appreciate it. All right, where are we off to with our final weird creature encounter for the United States?
Flying dinosaurs. And I'll bring a story up that happened in Texas, but pterodactyls have been spotted all over the place, especially in the desert Southwest, Mexico, South America. There's I don't remember the African country, and also in New Guinea. Descriptions of this creature are a pterodactyl. Back in the 1970s, one of the more famous sightings in the U.S., 3 science teachers who were on they had gone to, it was a conference day, and they had gone to a conference, and they were driving home. And this was out in West Texas. They were driving home through a desert area, and one of them noticed what she thought was a glider in the sky, and they slowed down and looked up, and the thing got closer and closer, and they estimated the wingspan to be, I don't know, 15 to 20 feet. It was just an enormous flying reptile. And, the description of the head, the bat-like wings, the tail, everything was right from a science book. It was a pterodactyl, and I would think that, science teachers would know what that animal looked like. And yeah, I know it's the 1970s, but science teachers, on that salary, you can't afford cocaine, so I would believe them. And I mean, why not? I love the stories of living dinosaurs, because when 65 million years ago, when we were hit with the asteroid that supposedly killed all the dinosaurs, there are spots in this earth. Why couldn't they have survived? And there have been enough reports of flying reptiles that I think that's a possibility.
To me, I think that would be seen a lot more often, and planes would certainly notice it. And now in places like Papua New Guinea and some of these faraway areas, that does sound a lot more believable to me. But I would also still think that at some point they would have to spread out beyond the banks where they're at. And, if there was a race of pterodactyl-like creatures or pterodons, this would be something that would really end up upsetting the balance of nature. That's why at the end of I think it was like the second Jurassic Park movie or third one, when they're flying away and they see the pterodactyls in the sky, I was like, oh, air superiority. We're in a lot of trouble if they don't shoot these bastards down now and they start reproducing and spreading. This could be the dinosaur, not the T-Rex or the velociraptors. These flying bastards are going to be the one that take us out a little bit more. Yes, Jason, I'm aware it's a movie, but I'm talking about it in real life as well. If they are out there, that could cause a lot of trouble.
Well, yeah, but look at the look at the condor. I mean, I'm not scared of condors, but there aren't very many of them. They've been around forever, and they're not seen very often because there are so few. I mean, if these things are living, there are lots of places, even in the United States, that people. I mean, they're so lightly populated that I think some of these. I mean, let's go back to Bigfoot, and some of these monsters could be alive and walking around, and there's just so few people that we don't see them. And when it comes to a pilot seeing one, there was a famous report out of Alaska of a pilot witnessing a teratorn, which is a condor-like bird from the Pleistocene era that was as big as a small plane, and this guy saw one. We don't know what's out there. Could be anything.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I hope the book is a success and takes off for you as usual. And I love that you were able to stop by and chat with us, give us a little look at the book and the stories that'll be covered in there. But now we're at the time, Jason, where before I let you go, we need to hear a new Black-Eyed Kid story for our listeners. What have you got for us?
Okay. A new one, really? Are there any new ones? Yeah, there was a case. See, I'm trying to. God, I got so many of them in my head. There was a case out of Pennsylvania. There's a man visiting a friend of his in Pittsburgh, and his friend lived in a really big apartment building that had a parking garage, and he had parked up near the top. And there weren't any cars up there when he went at like 1 or 2 in the morning to get back in his car and drive the 30 miles home. And when he was walking out to his car, he, felt weird. And he noticed that there were 2 older teenagers walking toward him. And he thought it just really struck him as odd because they were wearing gear like starter jackets and hats for minor league team that hadn't existed in 20 years. And he thought that was, really strange. He got in his car and they approached and stood by his door. And it was, the typical Black-Eyed Kids. One of them stood in front. The other one stood a couple steps behind, and the one in front did all the talking. And he spoke really intelligently and, not like a person, of his age would generally talk, saying, this guy rolled down the window about an inch, and the guy was like, would you please give us a ride? And he gave, a vague address. And, the guy in the car said, no, I'm not going to let you in the car. Please, I would really appreciate it if you would give us a ride. No, I'm not going to give you a ride. And then he noticed that the other guy had wandered around back. Let's bring it back to Jurassic Park, the first one, when the Australian big game hunter was out looking for the velociraptors, clever girl. That's the vision he had, is that this thing was positioning himself, in an attack mode, to come in from the side. So he said, I'm not doing anything for you, put his car in reverse and got the heck out of there. And as he was driving away, down through the parking garage, he was a little freaked out. He was like, I hope I don't see these kids again because it's going to scare the hell out of me. And he didn't. He got out on the street, drove a couple blocks. There was a stoplight, and even though it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, he still stopped at the stoplight, didn't want a ticket. And when he was sitting there at the stoplight, he looked over because he noticed movement, and these 2 kids were standing on the sidewalk smiling at him. And he didn't wait for the light to turn green. He just floored it and sped the 30 miles all the way home, scared to death that, every place that he had to slow down to turn, or, whenever he stopped at his house, that they would be there, but they weren't.
Yeah. No wonder people hate the black-eyed kids. Jason, what a creepy, creepy story. Thank you so much for being here, man. And we appreciate, again, the early look at the new book, Chasing American Monsters. It'll be out in March of 2019 in paperback and Kindle edition. For those of you who are interested, from Alabama to Wyoming and every state in between, the United States is crawling with monsters lurking in the dark corners. And Jason Offutt has put them together in one comprehensive tome to take a look at. Jason, thank you so much. We'll look forward to catching up with you as your next book comes out. What's your next project you're working on?
Oh, the next paranormal book I'm working on is Chasing Canada's Monsters.
So right there near the Texas border.
Right.
Good.
Way down south. Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
Well, let us know when that comes out. We'd love to visit with you and hear what kind of weird shenanigans they've got going in Canada.
All right. Dave, Tim, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been great.
Always a pleasure to catch up with you. Thank you all for tuning in and being part of our world. And remember, you can catch up with me Monday through Friday when I host Midnight in the Desert, the best in anomalous talk radio, Monday through Friday. That's 9 p.m. to midnight Pacific. That is 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern. And for those of you on the East Coast, that is, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Central. And for East Coasters, it is 12 a.m. till 3 a.m. And you can subscribe to the show. You can find more information at midnightinthedesert.com and keep up with what's going on. And we have a big Star Trek spectacular coming up this week on Midnight in the Desert. And for those of you Star Trek fans, make sure you check it out. We've got some of the former celebrities, guests that were on the show, writers, directors, producers. This is going to be a very cool, comprehensive show with a lot of really interesting people, all 3 hours. And I believe that's on the 15th. So if you are into fantasy, fiction, and Star Trek, make sure that you check out our Midnight in the Desert show. We'll be back with you next week with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. And don't forget, Tuesday, a brand new edition of True Crime Tuesday, and we'd love for you to be a part of it with us. Plus, I promise we will be making the announcement of who gets to take home Tim's $500. Tim, it's time to unfurl those fingers, and let that money fly to the true winner. So don't get me all wound up on this episode, all right?
Are you sure? Because, I mean, we have a pretty exciting episode, Dave, and I was kind of hoping you'd really get into it.
No, Tim, no. The winner has to be revealed. Besides, I'm getting a lot of angry emails. Plus, here, let me give you a little tip. If you send me hate mail and anger, you're probably, even if you were the winner, you might get taken out of the envelope. That's all I'm going to say. Thomas Horan will be with us on True Crime Tuesday. The Ketty Cabin Murders will be the topic, so make sure you tune in for that. Plus, Dumb Crimes, Stupid Criminals. We're going to have a great time on that show, and then we're back again with you next weekend with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. I'm Dave Schrader. That's Tim Dennis, because, well, that's who we are. Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Darkness.